With so much happening in the US elections, it's very easy to forget that 2020 has been crazy for various reasons, not just because of what's happening politically. We have to remember that it was just this year that UFOs were actually admitted. Now you got to think about this is a question from the times of Aristotle, that people have been wondering, are humans alone? Now major government branches like the Navy have actually admitted that these crafts, and we've seen pilot fighters go in shows like the Joe Rogan, like pilot David Fravor, who actually admitted that he witnessed a UFO, not just any regular UFO, not a little dot in the sky, but something that was, to his expert opinion and his propensity for honesty, at least from the initial interviews, this thing was an object that went from 0 to 1,000 miles per hour in a split of a second. It's something that is, at least the way that he described it, almost irrefutable, that this could not have been human technology. So if you're wondering why this channel is called Second Earth, well, I actually have the perfect article from the New York Times that kind of describes it all. And we'll also be going over some remarkable images from Carl Jung's Red Book to explain why UFOs, at least to this date, has been so difficult to accept, or at least the concepts of aliens. So if you're curious what I'm talking about, please stay tuned. Alright, ladies and gentlemen, so if you were curious about why this channel is called Second Earth, I wanted to pull out this New York Times article. Looking for another Earth? Here are 300 million. Maybe. Or, if you read the article, maybe more. A new analysis of data from NASA's Kepler spacecraft increases the number of habitable exoplanets thought to exist in this galaxy. A decade ago, a brand of astronomers set out to investigate one of the oldest questions taunting philosophers, scientists, priests, astronomers, mystics, and the rest of the human race. I really like how this is starting. How many more Earths are out there, if any? How many far-flung planets exist that could harbor life as we know it? Their tools was the Kepler spacecraft, which was launched in March 2009 on a 3.5-year mission to monitor 150,000 stars in a patch of sky in the Milky Way. It looked for tiny dips in starlight caused by an exoplanet passing in front of its home star. This was actually a kind of a newer method that was utilized, and what they would do is they would look at spectrometer readings and see if there was any dip in the reading, and if there was some kind of dip in the sunlight and it was a regular kind of orbital type of pattern, they can deduce that there were planets in that star. It's not E.T., but it's E.T. home, said William Barucki when the mission was launched in March 2009. It was Dr. Barucki, an astronomer now retired from NASA's Ames Research Center, who dreamed up the project and spent 2 decades convincing NASA to do it. Before the spacecraft finally gave out in 2018, it had discovered more than 4,000 candidate worlds among those stars. So far, none have shown any sign of life or habitation. Granted, they are far away and hard to study. And this goes to the Carl Sagan famous quote, "Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence." And what I find so ironic about that quote is that I see fallacies in 2 different sides of that quote. Well, first of all, to get evidence of something that is technically smarter than you, and if you're a hard scientist who requires you to create a standard scientific study, well, inevitably, when you're studying something that's smarter than you already destroyed the study, because the actual subject, the actual alien or whatever ET, interdimensional creature, whatever it is that you're trying to study, it becomes a confounding variable in itself, because the nature of studies is that you have to be able to control your environment so that the variables are not affected by confounding factors. That's one of the reasons why they had such a hard time at Skinwalker Ranch, that ranch that was owned by billionaire Bob Bigelow, and there were scientists that went there, and they're trying to get the evidence. And there were many claims from credible individuals who had seen remarkable things at that ranch. But it just seemed that every time that they actually had a video or an image or some kind of evidence that conveniently, and maybe convenient for the skeptics, but conveniently the footage was just missing, or it was scratched out, or there was noise there, or they just weren't able to have batteries. The batteries were drained out. So this is what I mean by when you're trying to study something that's smarter than you, that may not necessarily want to be studied, that this becomes an issue, that they can actually be affecting the very evidence that you're trying to capture, the very proof of their existence, so to speak. So that's why I thought it was kind of a fallacy to say that you need extraordinary evidence to capture something that's way smarter than you and might know that you're trying to capture it. And the other fallacy in the Carl Sagan quote is that, who says this is extraordinary? And I think that's what this article is kind of hinting at, is that there are so many planets, possibly on the Milky Way, that to say that there's life outside of this planet, it might actually be a kind of an ordinary claim. Reading further, extrapolated, that figure suggests that there are billions of exoplanets in the Milky Way galaxy. Billions of exoplanets in the Milky Way galaxy, but how many of those are potentially habitable? After crunching Kepler's data for 2 years, a team of 44 astronomers led by Steve Bryson of NASA Ames had landed on what they say is the definitive answer, at least for now. Their paper has been accepted by the publication in the Astronomical Journal. Kepler's former goal was to measure a number called ETA Earth, the fraction of sun-like stars that have an Earth-sized object orbiting them in the Goldilocks or habitable zone, where it is warm enough for the surface to retain liquid water. The team calculated that at least 1/3, and perhaps as many as 90% of stars similar in mass and brightness to our sun have rocks like Earth in their habitable zone. I mean, 90%. 90% of suns like our sun might have a rock like Earth. That's remarkable. That would have never been predicted hundreds of years ago. With the range reflecting the researchers' confidence in their various methods and assumptions, that is no small bonanza, however you look at it. According to NASA estimate, there are at least 100 billion stars in the Milky Way, of which about 4 billion are sun-like. If only 7% of those stars have habitable planets, a serious conservative estimate, there could be as many as 300 million potential habitable Earths out there in the Milky Way alone. Okay, and remember that we're just talking about the Milky Way, just our galaxy. 300 million potential Earths from a conservative estimate just in our galaxy. Very extraordinary, right? Extraordinary in how many planets there are, not extraordinary in that trying to find life outside of Earth should require some extraordinary evidence. So kind of to add the icing to the cake, says here, we want to be very conservative in case nature has any surprises regarding habitability, meaning it's more difficult than we might have thought. So we're lowballing the estimates intentionally. So, I mean, you have to really think about it because, yeah, they're talking about the Milky Way, right? But if you read like books like Michio Kaku's Physics of the Impossible, well, he talks about not just civilizations that are potentially harboring in our galaxy, but he talks about maybe, just maybe, there are civilizations that are in other galaxies that through millions and millions of years of evolution past our scale, past what we've accomplished, they might have eventually figured out how to actually manipulate space and time in such a manner that they could actually jump from galaxy to galaxy. If this is true, then the candidates are, well, take that 300 million and then multiply it by 100 billion. That's how much potential alien interdimensional life, whatever you want to call it. If you want to talk about interdimensional, we're going to have to make that number even higher. It's like we're playing a video game, and the scientists are looking at the video game and they're like, oh yeah, there's only one character in this video game. But everything that we know about the rules of the video game, everything that we see about the worlds and the things that are possible within this video game is indicating that there should be billions of characters. I mean, in this case, 300 million, but if you're talking about other galaxies, trillions of characters. So it's ridiculous to say that you need extraordinary evidence to support something that is almost a mathematical inevitability. So on average, astronomers have calculated the nearest such planet should be about 20 light years away. So I think that's the major factor that has kept scientists from assuming that any alien can just visit another alien, because we're still kind of hinged on the classic physics that, oh, it's going to take this astronomical amount of time to get to another star, at least, maybe 1,000 years if you're using traditional methods. This is the science result we've all been waiting for, the reason that Kepler was selected for flight in December 2001. The new result means that the galaxy is at least twice as fertile as estimated in one of its first analysis of Kepler data in 2013. Very interesting terminology, fertile. I can keep reading, but I want to talk about some other things, and I don't want this video to be too long. So one of the questions that I have here is, if there are so many stars in our galaxy alone, and it has been, verified by major government agencies like the Navy that UFOs are actually coming to Earth, and there are extraordinary crafts that we cannot explain with how we understand our own physics. If this is happening, then there's only one question that I have to ask. What did the pilots look like? Because it was really easy to make fun of people, for example, who talked about quote-unquote reptilians. Oh, do you think reptilians are real? What are you, David Icke supporter? Really easy to make fun of those people. But the question still lingers. What did they look like? Do you think they're going to look like exactly like us? Or should we maybe, if there are people who are being claimed to have been actually taken in these crafts and who have said what these things might look like, should we maybe, just maybe, trust some of these individuals? And so I actually asked this question in my channel. I asked, with the 261 people reporting, how many viewers of Second Earth believe reptilian aliens exist? 70% of you guys and gals said yes, they exist, with only 21% saying no, you're out of your mind. But there is another 8% that believe that these might be actually Earth-born residents. For example, does anybody know what Earth used to look like before the supercontinent Pangea? No, I don't think so. There are still reptiles. There were some type of living beings that were happening on Earth. There were actually things that looked like wolves that preceded even the evolution of flowers. So it's really difficult to actually ascertain if we're the first star-born species to have ever been present in this planet, because when you're talking about hundreds and hundreds of millions of years of history, eventually the tectonic plates, they kind of recycle in a manner where no evidence would ever survive to that point. It would be eviscerated by the lava that if there's even any kind of structure, it would just not exist anymore. So I think that this, yes, there are Earth-born residents, it's a potential answer. It's a potentially viable answer, even if we don't see them nowadays. But there was something else that I wanted to mention that was quite amazing. And I actually never saw this until today. And even I was a little shocked by this. One of the scientists who really kind of gave, let's say, like a skeptical reasoning to not believe in aliens, well, it was this man, Carl Jung. Now, the thing about Carl Jung is he had this archetype theory that humans were projecting snake-like symbols based on our primal fears of snakes. And that is the reason why you see dragons and reptilian-looking gods and all these weird, universal, serpent-like motifs throughout the entire world. Carl Jung was the one who said, hey, maybe this is just a manifestation of our minds, our psychology. But here's the thing about Carl Jung that I find fascinating. Well, first, he was born in 1875 to 1961. So from my understanding of Carl Jung, he had actually traveled throughout the world and had seen that these dragon-like gods were universal in many cultures. And for an individual who was born in 1875, I find it very difficult for him to have any reason to believe that these motifs, these symbolisms of dragons, could be anything else than your internal world. Because back then, there was no recourse, absolutely no knowledge that Earth was even replicated anywhere, let alone hundreds of millions of times just in our galaxy alone. And so something else to take note is that here it says divergence and break. While Jung worked on his psychology of the unconscious, his study of the transformations and symbolisms of the libido, tensions manifested between him and Freud because of various disagreements, including those concerning the nature of the libido. Jung de-emphasized the importance of sexual development and focused on the collective unconscious. You have to wonder, why did he believe that everybody had this collective unconscious? Could it be that all these dragon-like motifs were being, instead of extrapolated into the universe that exists of the millions of characters that might exist there, it was kind of introspectively analyzed to be a manifestation of our psychology, because he had no other ways of imagining how this is even possible. At least that has always been my interpretation of how Carl Jung took some of this information. But there was something else that happened that was really, really interesting with Carl Jung. Later in his life, he came out with a book called The Red Book. It says here, in 1913, at the age of 38, Jung experienced a horrible confrontation with the unconscious. He saw visions and heard voices. He worried at times that he was menaced by a psychosis or was doing a schizophrenia. He decided that it was a valuable experience, and in private, he induced hallucinations, or in his words, active imaginations. He recorded everything he felt in small journals. Jung began to transcribe his notes into a larger red leather-bound book on which he worked intermittently for 16 years. So he was self-inducing hallucinations. I don't know if that means he did it through meditation or through actual hallucinogens, but the implications is that he found these active imaginations useful. What was he imagining? Well, this is going to shock you. Let me show you what I'm talking about. I'm going to show you some of the illustrations that came out of his red book, and the reason why when I see dragons all over the world, I don't assume it to be just an introspective thing, because remember, the people who take hallucinogens often don't just describe figures that are being able to, that oftentimes they can communicate not just within themselves, but those who are taking hallucinogens with them, as if both people are actually witnessing the exact same thing. But they do describe sometimes what they call aliens in their hallucinogenic experiences. This is true. In fact, even Dr. E. Mack, the Harvard professor who was studying alien abductions, he also discussed this theme of hallucinogens, alien abductions, and kind of trying to cipher out why there is a commonality between people seeing aliens and alien abductions as well as in hallucinogenic experiences. Check out one of his images from his red book. Once again, the dragon, the serpent. But this I found to be extraordinary, and I'll show you why, because I've seen this motif before. I've seen this imagery. Check this out. In Mayan culture, do you see this? The way that the tree kind of branches out, looking just like this tree that's coming out of the snake's mouth, the serpent's mouth. In Mayan culture, it's called the world tree. The Mayans believed in a world of three layers: heaven, the middle world, and the underworld. Its roots were in the underworld, its trunk in the middle world, and its branches in the highest layer of the other world. The tree represents the Milky Way. I wish Carl Jung had done more mind studies, because maybe he would have reassessed his interpretation of the dragon. So it says here, the Milky Way itself was celebrated by the Maya. They called it the world tree, which was represented by a tall and majestic flowering tree. The Milky Way was also called the Wakan Chan. Wak means 6 or erect. Kan means 4, serpent or sky. Why is there this interesting connection between the words of serpent and sky, as if they can't decide which one is the actual interpretation? And I've seen this before. I once read my interpretation of the world tree, where it said that the tree extended into the Milky Way, and that within the branches of the tree there were serpents that lived in those branches, almost as if to say that serpents are living in the Milky Way, that dragons are not from this earth, but that of other stars in the Milky Way. And what I find so astonishing is that when you actually look at the descriptions of dragons, one of the commonalities of dragons is that while they're extremely smart, they sometimes can telepathically speak. You know, this is something that if you look at alien abduction studies, you see that these individuals communicate oftentimes with the aliens telepathically. Dragons are often associated with gold. This would go right hand in hand with Zecharia Sitchin's idea that when aliens came here, they made humans to excavate gold. Dragons live under the earth in caves sometimes. This also goes with the Greek idea that Zeus came down from the skies with a lightning bulb, this human-looking type of alien from the clouds, and essentially sentenced all the Titans, which were serpentine creatures, into the underworld. And lastly, well, dragons can fly. And not can they only fly regardless of whether they have wings or not in their particular culture, but dragons are often thought to be of other worlds. This is true in a lot of different fantasies, stories, a lot of different reinterpretations of our ancient mythology. They talk about these creatures coming from other worlds, as it's called. So just to kind of give you a few more images that were coming out of the Red Book, check this one out. I find this interesting because of the kind of like four-sided cross, and they're even in the Maya interpretation, they're talking about that word that represents 4 or serpents. And then you also have this weird kind of like human-like deity, I don't know what this is, standing on some kind of floating device. And of course, this brings back the notion of Zoroastrianism. Something that was witnessed by one of the oldest Persian religions. And just to kind of top it off, here is another image from Carl Jung's Red Book that he was manifesting from his hallucinations with an angelic-looking creature. Once again, you have the motif of the 4-sided kind of like circle with petal. And then you also have a snake standing here. So, ladies and gentlemen, and what is he? Is he standing on top of a temple? Kind of like, it's interesting because it wasn't Jesus Christ and Abraham said to have risen from the temple? I don't know. This is really strange to me. I think the motifs and the iconography and whatever it is that Carl Jung was hallucinating, it seems not just to be similar to the Mayan culture, but in my interpretation, seems to be connected not with a psychological process, something that's internal, as he calls the collective consciousness. Maybe there is a collective consciousness. But I also think there's ample evidence, given the fact that the Milky Way has hundreds of millions of planets that are Earth-like, given that we have major government branches talking about crafts that are flying around, given that many people have talked about the idea of seeing reptilians. Now you see why I don't think of this reptilian idea as such a crazy idea. Anyways, that is the episode for today. Thank you so much for following me. If you'd like to support us, we do have, of course, a Patreon account. But I like to say that sharing is usually the best way to get these videos across. And if you want to reach me, please reach me at eafiles.contact@gmail.com. It's time to do some more of this topic, ladies and gentlemen. It's time to get deeper in this topic. So if you have any stories, any abduction stories, any experiences, any videos, anything that you've seen, please send it over. I will not publish anything without your permission, of course. But I would love to look further into this topic and hear what you, ladies and gentlemen, have to say about this. Thank you so much for following me. This is